I was lured into prostitution at the age of 12 from a child welfare run group home. Where I remained for many years. I was sold in legal establishments across Canada. And I was introduced to a very well-known pimp family where I remained with them for a few years. What I see Amnesty International doing is a big slap in the face to Canadian women and women internationally. They have been a part of the missing and murdered Indigenous women looking for helping the First Nations communities across Canada in their plight to have recognition that there's an issue with missing and murdered Indigenous women. And now they are supporting the decriminalisation of prostitution with the buyers and the sellers. I think that it is a moral issue and that this is a human rights violation in whole towards women, men, and girls and trans. I think that they're playing with fire, and for me, they've lost a lot of respect for an organization that I once advocated for. So that's why I'm here today, is we want them to back off of that and to say, you know what, we're not even gonna stand neutral. We oppose the buying and selling of people for sexual purposes.
My name's Fiona Broadfoot and I'm a sex trade survivor from the UK. I was exploited into prostitution at the tender age of 15 after meeting a man who was a pimp. I thought I'd fallen in love with the coolest, most gorgeous guy I'd ever met. I was sadly mistaken. Where Amnesty International are concerned, I cannot believe a so-called human rights organisation want to promote the abuse of women and girls for the sake of men's sexual desire. I believe that this will create much more underground prostitution. The so-called legalised system will be ignored. Hideous abuse will continue to be acted out on women and girls, vulnerable women and girls. For the minority of women who see this as a job like any other and empowerment, well, they are a very small minority, and I believe they have a responsibility to keep quiet and just do it behind closed doors. That's where they get off, because for the vast majority of people involved in prostitution, they are abused on a massive level. Legalising it will not take away that abuse. What it is, it's about power and control. And we need to be firmly introducing the sex buyers law and making men responsible for their own sexual deviance and not normalising it and legitimising it and killing women.
My name is Rachel Moran and I got into prostitution at 15 years of age from a situation of adolescent homelessness. Much like Fiona, who just spoke, I met a man who I thought was the coolest person in the world too. The main reason I came here today is to confront Amnesty International and their appalling, breathtakingly disgraceful proposal to decriminalise pimps and punters in the global sex trade. The main issue that I have with what they are proposing to do is the effect, of course, that it will have globally if they go ahead with this. Let me just briefly say that if we want to look at why this is such a bad idea, we only need to look at how prostitution is panning out in countries with legalised and decriminalised regimes. They are very, very, very similar. What's happening in Germany and in Holland and in New Zealand, on the surface of it, it's strikingly similar, because these models both create the same conditions, and the first most important of those conditions is the massive expansion of the global sex trade. What you'll see when you look at Holland and Germany and New Zealand is cut rate specials for OAPs and the unemployed. We have signs up in the streets, a woman, a beer and a blood sausage. Women are being packaged at lunchtime deals for men who want to nip out from work and have themselves something to eat, something to drink and something to use all in the space of the same hour. So this is where legalised and decriminalised regimes are taking us. It is a human rights violation on a massive scale. Having lived prostitution and having been delivered the insult from the most publicly recognised human rights organisation on the face of this earth, that everything that happened to me was all above board, normal and ought to be decriminalised and socially sanctioned, was a slap in the face unparalleled. I've never been so insulted since the day I started this work.
My story is completely, not completely, but basically different. I was abused as a child by my father. I was raped. I was 16 years old. I had a bad marriage. I lost everything with a divorce, except my 2 children I really loved. And in my 40s, I was in a complete desperate situation. Complete desperate. I couldn't find a way out. I tried to find a job. I couldn't find a job, and I tried and I tried. And then I was thinking about a legal option to afford life for me and my children. And the last legal option without any border or job interview or something like that is to make a profile on the internet and sell myself. And I'm shocked, I'm really shocked about Amnesty International, because for me, Amnesty International always was an organization which is for the poorest, for the unheard, for the unrecognized, suffering people in the world. And prostitution is not human, and it can't have any dignity. It can't be any dignity in it or humanity, because it's a man buying a woman, and if a man buys a woman, he paid for using her. I completely don't understand Amnesty International. It's completely against humanity, dignity, and what Amnesty International stands for. And we have a long story with Amnesty International in Germany, and they did great things and really worked for people. Nobody did care for them. And now they ignore about 380,000 women in Germany. So I really, really hope that Amnesty International thinks about his stand against prostitution and help supporting the Nordic model.
Thank you. My name's Julie Bindel. I'm a journalist and a campaigner against men's sexual violence towards women, and also a board member of Space. And last January, somebody close to Amnesty International leaked a document to me that showed a policy position that had been drafted by Amnesty that had obviously not gone out to consultation. It was not a consultation paper. We all know the difference. A consultation paper has this side of the argument and that side of the argument, and why don't members make up their minds? This was just clearly a policy position paper that we soon found out through looking at minutes of meetings was about to become legitimised through the entire organisation. And within hours of this being published, the survivor abolitionist movement and allies and human rights organisations on the side of feminists who oppose men's sexual exploitation had gone absolutely crazy with the notion that Amnesty International could even consider doing this. And the rest is history, or it will be very soon, let's hope. So my role is simply to ask a couple of questions, but you can talk to any of the women on the panel in this setup or afterwards, privately one-to-one. But I just want to ask one question first of Rachel, which is that Amnesty clearly has said over and over again, as has the sex workers' rights lobby, that it is against the sexual exploitation of children in the industry, it's against trafficking, and has rightly pointed out that criminal and civil laws cover both of those crimes and abuses. So please explain what is wrong with consensual sex between adults in prostitution being totally decriminalised if we leave out trafficking and if we leave out child sexual exploitation.
Well, the problem is that we don't live in a fairy tale land where we can de-link these things that are so intrinsically linked that you cannot possibly separate them. First of all, I'll circle back to that, Julie, but I think what we need to look at, like I said earlier on, is what actually happens in, and New Zealand is a perfect example, in a country that adopts the policy as law that Amnesty are proposing. There is a group called Street Reach in New Zealand, and they deliver frontline services to women in prostitution. And they have documented a very sharp increase in street-based prostitution in the city of Auckland, directly and immediately and as a result of decriminalisation. So like I said earlier on, what you deal with in a regime like that is a massive and immediate expansion of the sex trade, right? Now the minute you have that, you have all of the other abuses that go along with it multiplied by many times. It's flat out lunacy to imagine that a human rights organisation could possibly condone what they refer to as the operational aspects of the sex trade. The operational aspects of the sex trade, in their terminology, their lingo, that's a leaked document, because we have 2 leaked documents now. The public may not be as aware of this, of course, as those of us in the movement are, but there was the document that was leaked back in January of 2014, and a second document that was leaked within recent weeks. And in this most recent leaked document, they refer to, or skim over rather, and try to avoid terminology like pimping, procuring, and all of that, and instead refer to them as the operational aspects of the sex trade. Now look, to refer to pimping as the operational aspects of the sex trade is no different to, it's every bit as baldly ridiculous as it would be to refer to the getaway car as the operational aspect of a bank raid, right? They're using this terminology to deliberately gloss over and skim over the human rights violations that they are proposing, endorsing. It actually feels to me as if we're way deep down the rabbit hole, because that's where certain people in Amnesty International want to take us, and themselves. And I would just sincerely hope that Amnesty don't go ahead and do this, because apart from the fact that they will implode their own reputation, they will never recover from this, by the way, never. But they are going to cause an absolute wave of misery across the globe that will last for God only knows how many decades. And it will weigh most heavily, as it always does, on impoverished women and girls. Absolutely. In the developing world. Women of colour will be taken in the neck yet again from relatively privileged white men. We have seen this for centuries, and we're going to see plenty more of it if certain individuals within Amnesty International have anything got to do with it. But to get back to your original question, Julie, those same civil and criminal laws that are in place to provide safety in those situations were in place when every single one of us went into prostitution.
Absolutely.
The laws are not worth the paper they're written on as long as the demand is not tackled. Prostitution has got to be tackled at the root, which is the male demand for paid sex. It is about time men were held to account for what they do with their own penises. We are not in a playground here. We're all adults, or, you know, those of us who are over the age of bloody well reason ought to understand that any part of your body, be it your hand, your forehead, your penis, whatever it may be, can be used as a weapon if that's how you choose to use it, right? I am bald angry at this point with the fact that men are not being asked to behave as adults when they're adults. And Amnesty really need to wake the hell up here and take a look at what it is, the deeper implications of what it is that they are proposing, endorsing. Because what they are sending out, they are on the edge, let me say, of sending out a global message to men everywhere that says, do what you like with your dick, it doesn't matter a damn who you're harming. That is the problem. In the original leaked document, it ought to be noted, Amnesty used different language, somewhat different language to the language that they've used in the most recently leaked document. Back in the spring of 2014, they were talking about the right to buy sex, the right to buy sex, okay? And that is actually a couple of steps ahead. They've rolled back a bit on their language. I think even the people who put that document together can see how unacceptable what they're proposing is. What they're proposing now on the surface of it, it seems a little more genteel, but it sends the very, very same message. It sends the very same message. So I suppose I cannot say it enough times really. Amnesty have got to roll back on this one for the sake of everybody, for the sake of human rights, for the sake of themselves. But let me just talk for a few moments about the differences between Sweden and a country like Holland, for example. We are told all the time the ridiculous spin and nonsense that the Nordic model increases violence towards women. Well, the evidence is out there that rape has dropped 48% in Norway since the implementation of the Nordic model. All of these stats can be found, they've been released. I mean, if you want to look at whether or not a legal model is safe, the first thing you need to do is look at the murder rate. The murder rate in Holland is through the roof. It was at 127 the last time I counted. That's for these last 16 years. In that same time frame, over in Sweden, the only one single woman who was in prostitution who was murdered by her husband, the father of her own children, when she went to visit her kids in a visitation centre. That young woman happened to be in prostitution, but her murder was obviously unrelated to prostitution. It was a straightforward case of fatal domestic violence. So, getting back to what I was saying, look at the murder rates. That's what we have got to do. Look at the murder rates in Norway, in Iceland, in Sweden, and compare them with the murder rates in Germany, in New Zealand, and in Holland. I can tell you, the women in Germany are dropping like flies. We heard from Marie earlier on talking about young women being found murdered out in the woods. People don't even know who they are. There's a lot of lies and spin going on about the regulated system in Germany. The system in Germany is so well regulated that you have 44 women out of 450,000 registered. That is absolute nuts.
Talk about the sex trade lobby, and there's kind of united front presented in a lot of the articles that you read, that sex workers are behind this Amnesty resolution. People shouldn't speak out about what sex workers want. And I wondered if you could kind of, with your experience of the sex trade lobby, talk about where do they come from, who are they, and are they, when in your experiences in prostitution, did you ever come across unionised workers?
Many of the
people that they describe as sex workers are the pimps and the brothel owners and the buyers. I also think when I was involved in prostitution, I was so dehumanised, I'd been so shut down that I would argue that I was a happy hooker, that it was a job like any other, that I wouldn't work in an office for minimum wage, etc., etc. And all the time inside I was screaming. And I had to have that attitude, because the minute I acknowledged what was the reality of what was happening to me, I had to exit. I could not sell myself again. Bridget, you spoke yesterday and said, you know, we didn't choose prostitution. Prostitution chose us. And I believe that the people who are speaking loudly about promoting this as a job like any other are either very privileged women who've chosen prostitution, and they are a tiny minority, because for the vast majority of us, we're silenced, we're mentally ill, we're addicted to drugs, we're living in a bubble, we're married to people who don't know our past, we have children that we're protecting because we don't want them to know our past, you know. We want access to employment, so we keep our mouths shut if we're fortunate enough not to be criminalised whilst we're involved in prostitution. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of women that we all speak to on a regular basis, because this is our lives. We haven't come out of prostitution and it's all, hey, hunky-dory. We stand for them women. We stand for the murdered women. We stand for the women entrenched in prostitution who were silenced. Well, I will never go away and be quiet, ever. Because for all of us sat here, you know, you're very fortunate that you've never had to sell your soul to somebody. And all our daughters and all our children need protecting from this abhorrent abuse.
What I see with the pro-lobby is that they sugarcoat it as it's like a walk in the park. My pimp, you know, was a nice guy. You know, he would come out and give the homeless guy $100 and, you know, be nice and, you know, buy all the stable children new bikes once a year. But he was a monster. If you didn't make that quota, he would beat the hell out of you. So the legacy left behind from prostitution doesn't match up with the pro-lobby saying. And like Fiona, if you would have asked me when I was still in the game what I felt, and I would have said, I'm queen bee. I do this, I choose this. But really, to have choice, you have to have two equal opportunities. And that are healthy and balanced. You know, prostitution is very savvy. It picks the girls, and it picks the girls that are fractured, you know, and we need to be really, really clear about the term sex worker. To me, it wasn't work. It was abuse. And I'm not going to call what I did work. It was paid abuse. It was paid rape.
Almost every woman I've ever met in the abolitionist movement has buried women that they knew via prostitution, including myself. So it is most sickening, and it really would induce, you know, a lot of anger when you listen to this nonsense coming out of the pro-prostitution lobby about how prostitution is a consensual adult choice. When we have literally stood at the gravesides of women who've been buried because of prostitution. There's Bridget raising 2 orphans, orphaned because of prostitution. We have just had enough of the nonsense and the spin. We've just had enough of it. And Amnesty getting on board with that craziness is a step too far and a step beyond anything that we are prepared to take. I think that there are several reasons involved in why they're trying to take this step, and I think it's important to remember also that Amnesty is, you know, a global organisation with tons and tons, I'm not sure how many countries involved, probably 100 or more. This came out of Amnesty International's UK office, so it's not like as if the entirety of Amnesty International are trying to push this, and it's important, I think, for everybody to remember that no doubt there's a lot of internal wrangling going on right now within Amnesty and more to come. I think one of the reasons why they're trying to push this is because they're coming from a position, I believe, where they think that prostitution is inevitable. So they're looking at this and they're saying, well, prostitution is inevitable, so let's go down the harm reduction route. Well, we refuse to believe that a human rights violation is inevitable. And I think that Amnesty, if they were looking at this issue coming truly from a perspective of human rights, they couldn't possibly arrive at the decision that that they're proposing they ought to arrive at. A big part of the problem, by the way, where Amnesty, a big part of the reason I believe why they're headed in the wrong direction here is because they've started out by making the mistake of mischaracterising prostituted sex as consensual sex. Yeah. Prostituted sex is coerced sex. I mean, look, if two people are having consensual sex, truly consensual sex, sex for the sake of sex, nobody's pulling their wallet out. There's a big difference between consensual sex and coerced sex, and that's exactly the point that Amnesty have gone in the wrong direction on. Now, all that we can do is hope that there are enough people who haven't lost their minds within Amnesty International who are voting at the ICM in Dublin in a couple of days' time. We need to hope that there are enough of them who can see this for what it is. And I guess, we may hope so for Amnesty's sake also, because if they vote to decriminalise a human rights violation that is destroying the lives of tens of millions of women and children all over the world, they will never wash that stain off their reputation.